Welcome to the BuyBox Experts podcast. We bring to light the unique opportunities brands face in today's e-commerce world.
Hi, I'm James Thompson, one of the hosts of the BuyBox Experts podcast. I'm a partner with BuyBox Experts and the former business head of the Selling on Amazon team at Amazon, as well as the first account manager for the Fulfillment by Amazon program. I am the co-author of the book Controlling Your Brand in the Age of Amazon and co-founder of the Prosper Show, one of the largest continuing education conferences for Amazon sellers here in North America. Today's episode is brought to you by BuyBox Experts. BuyBox Experts takes ambitious brands and makes them unbeatable. When you hire BuyBox Experts, you receive the strategy optimization and marketing performance to succeed on Amazon. Go to buyboxexperts.com to learn more. Today, we are joined by Hendrik Laubscher, CEO and founder of Blue Cape Ventures, a consulting and educational organization specializing in global and cross-border e-commerce. Hendrik is a trusted advisor to technology investors and operating companies all over the world. Based in Cape Town, South Africa, Hendrik runs the very successful blog titled Electric Thoughts in a Digital Era. This is my very favorite source of insights on what's happening around the world in e-commerce. So welcome, Hendrik, and thank you for joining us today on our BuyBox Experts podcast.
James, thanks for having me, and looking forward to our conversation.
So let me start with a clarification of terminology. We hear the word global e-commerce and the word cross-border e-commerce both being used in reference to companies selling outside their own markets. Is there an important distinction between those two particular terms, global e-commerce and cross-border e-commerce?
Yeah, James, I think that's a very interesting question, because I tend to believe that it's used interchangeably, and it leads to a huge amount of confusion by executives and also by people in the industry. They are not the same thing, and cross-border e-commerce is essentially when a business transacts with consumers outside the borders of their country. And by the company's country of operation, I'm referring to its headquarters. Mm-hmm. Secondly, cross-border global e-commerce is basically commerce that enables businesses to go global and reach consumers in markets through, whether that be through software, going to via marketplaces. There's a variety of tools that brands can use. But I think also what's important to note is that cross-border e-commerce has grown between 2 and 3.5x on normal local e-commerce, whereas global e-commerce, it's essentially an aggregate of the percentages that e-commerce has grown in all the various parts of the world. So I think from a brand point of view, cross-border is the important thing to not forget about, but it's also, you need to be very clear what it is and what it's not.
So if I'm a US-based company and I sell only in the US today, and I decide that I'm going to sell into Europe, what would have to happen for me to be experiencing cross-border e-commerce versus global e-commerce as it relates to me expanding into Europe?
So with cross-border, you are accessing consumers in new markets that you don't sell into. So as a Amazon brand, you are going to leverage Amazon's platform and open in markets like Germany, the UK, France, Spain, and the like. And for the global e-commerce, that's where you open a brand website in that country, because you feel that the cross-border has given your brand enough visibility into the local market.
So if I think of a brand that's having successful sales today on Amazon in the US, but they're finding that a lot of those orders are actually being shipped overseas to other customers, that's an opportunity for them to say, where is the demand coming from overseas? Should we potentially be thinking about using what we've learned about the demand in another country as an opportunity to actually create a physical presence in that country?
Yes and no. So I think it's very important that brands understand that if you are targeting emerging markets,
Mm-hmm.
then using and leveraging marketplaces is almost the de facto way to scale very fast. However, if we go back to your example and you are seeing your Amazon sales going to an aggregator, or there's various forms of not product diversion, but companies collecting orders for consumers that are not in the market in which you are shipping towards. I think it's, for me, I advise brands in that case that then you want to seriously consider using the marketplace.
Yes.
And going into that specific marketplace's country. So using your example, let's say you were seeing that your products were being bought by consumers in the UK and in Germany.
Yes.
Then I would say it's for me, it's not even a thought. It's just basically, okay, what do we need to access those markets on Amazon? And then it's stuff like bank accounts, business formulation, and all those things are become important. But I think, I think what brands really need to understand is just that the opportunity to grow outside your own home market, it's massive. And it's incredibly helpful to use that as a tool to future-proof yourself, in the sense that you can take learnings from these new markets and adapt to local brands. I've seen that. I've seen the reverse as well, where consumers, where, for example, similar languages are spoken, let's say use English, learnings from the US will basically sometimes be used in other developed markets in Europe. The point is that if you're a marketplace seller and you're seeing that your products are being shipped outside the market in which you are most focused on, that is a clue that you need to think about. Not think, you need to then act on. I need to go to a marketplace and then basically open a business on that specific country's business.
So, so let's take that concept, and I want to represent myself as typical kind of brand that BuyBox experts would work with. There's a massive world of e-commerce opportunity for brands outside of the United States, for example. How do brands start to make sense of what all this opportunity out there looks like, what part of it is relevant for their products, what it's going to take to get into some of these markets? I think about, based on the conversations I've had with you over the years, that there are billion-dollar marketplaces all over the world that most U.S. brand executives have never even heard of. And they're probably in countries that some of these people don't even know where those countries are. And yet there's demand for these Western brands. But how do you actually start to take that first step? Even if you are selling through a marketplace, that marketplace is only going to ship internationally to certain countries. How do I find out that there's demand in Russia or Africa or the Middle East for my products? How do I think about that in a way where, typically I'm going to have to assign somebody on my team to go and do research, and then we'll draw this out over years and years, and eventually maybe somebody gets on a plane or talks to a distributor overseas. It's a crazy situation, but the standard way in which companies look to expand typically is a slow, calculated one, which, is that approach going to work for e-commerce when, quite frankly, you don't know what's out there? So how do you make sense of what you don't know is out there?
What you've just explained is arguably the crux of the matter that I'm trying to help brands with. I think if you own a huge brand, even if a middle-sized brand, then, consumers are always going to be using the web to, go to your website and basically visit your products and see what it is. I think that for me is like clue number one, that you have potential demand in a new market. I also think that, what you've explained is that is the traditional model that you've explained, in a sense that it's a slow, painful process. Sorry, I know that's not the best word to
No,
explain, but
painful is true.
It's a process where the opportunity for lost capital and lost opportunity is very large.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a brand, for me, there are various companies that actually do this as their core function, and then I would then use these businesses to essentially help the brand get into a new market. So to answer your question, what I normally suggest is basically use your core tenants as the brand. So if you are in an American brand, your first local business or local market to think about is an English speaking market.
Okay.
So the most logical one that normally comes up is the UK. So that's like the first one to think about. We can also potentially, that could be your second market, in a sense where, you could be going to Canada as the first, in the sense that it's the same geographical area, the foreign currency volatility is almost nothing. It's essentially using your current infrastructure in a way that you can kind of control the growth, because as you wrote in your book, the opportunity for things to go wrong on marketplaces, it's vast.
Mm-hmm.
And CrossBorder, if you don't do it properly, it can become a very big, large, massive problem that basically leads to unhappy consumers, unhappy management, and in most cases, negativity. So for me, before you even think about sending somebody over and dealing with suppliers and all of those
Mm-hmm.
big things, there are startups such as Memento, which I know of, which helps massive brands leverage their local stock and basically leverage these local marketplaces to gain mass appeal very quickly. So for me, that is the first step. The second step is, if you're going into a developed market, which there's many, then you use a solution that leverages your brand website, and you use a tool, for example, like Flow or eShop World.
Mm-hmm.
The point is that you've got to think about the consumer. Where is your consumer? I know this is a very large question to answer, but I think I always say, think small initially. Don't think in years, because if you think in years, basically you've already failed. But also, the big mistake I see brands make, and it blows my mind, is everybody reads about the fact that China is this massive opportunity. It's $1 trillion market, What people don't understand is that China is arguably one of the most highly sensitive e-commerce market in the world. So you go there only if you have essentially completely solved all pain points. You don't go there, for example, if you're a brand, for example, I always use the monetary terms. If you are not doing $100 million in an ARR or annual run rate, the
Mm-hmm.
revenue run rate,
Mm-hmm.
then don't even think about China. It's too expensive. It's not worth the effort. You then think about local. So we go back to your example of the US brands. Canada for me is an obvious one. Second one that's recently become more valuable due to the closeness of it and the fact that you can have warehouses is Mexico. What many people don't understand, James, is that Mexico potentially is the fastest growing e-commerce market in Latin America. It's even growing faster than Brazil and Argentina. So the point is that these markets all have consumers that are looking to buy quality products.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact of the matter is, if it's an international brand, in most cases that's actual additional value that's given to the consumer, because he or she can then tell their family, by the way, guys, I have bought something, but this is an American-made product. it's way better quality than what I'm able to get locally. Those are the kinds of questions that you have to think about. In saying that also, the other thing that I always scratch my head over is there's no one-size-fits-all solution. There is strategies for every business that you need to do. It's a case-by-case story. Sorry, there's no cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm.
If there was, people would be all living on private islands and it would be a gloriously comfortable life. It's not. So you have to be very tactical and strategic to ensure that you optimize your next move when you go outside your home country.
So I make apparel, or I make beauty products, or I make sports products. Depending on these different types of categories, there are going to be different parts of the world that are more or less interested in these types of items. So let's say I do my research and I find that there are consumers in other countries that are in fact having my products imported into their countries by way of placing orders here in the US. I decide, okay, I want to go sell into, I don't know, Eastern Europe. That's great. Now the question becomes, I found some marketplaces in Eastern Europe where I might be able to sell. How on earth does a brand find digital agencies that can help them operate those businesses? There are Amazon agencies like ours. There are Alibaba agencies, but there aren't a lot of agencies that cover the marketplaces that we don't know as well, or at least I'm not aware of there being a whole infrastructure of agencies that can help brands with these different markets. Can you shed some light on, I want to sell into Eastern Europe, or I want to sell into Africa, or I want to sell into the Middle East? How do I go about finding the kinds of agencies or operator assistants that will help me get those markets up and running for my brand?
James, that may be arguably the toughest question that you can ask anybody in the cross-border / global commerce space, in the sense that, you are essentially trying to grow a business in a market that you are going blind into it in most cases, in the sense that you don't understand consumer perception, you don't understand consumer, pricing methodologies, you don't understand payments and all that stuff. As I mentioned, I think you use the local marketplace as your first point of entry in terms of information. In most cases, I've seen, especially in the emerging markets like
Mm-hmm.
Eastern Europe, Africa, the Middle East, a lot of times these large marketplaces have local teams, and these local teams have a variety of agencies that they know of that are supporting other global brands. So that, for me, brands shouldn't be hesitant to speak to their marketplaces, and doing research on finding an agency. Secondly, if they get stuck, and I say this because I do this often, they can get in touch with me and I'll help them, because I've over the years built a network of people that I know directly, and it's people that I trust, and these people are in most cases either working for the marketplace or they're in an agency that supports the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Let me shift gears a little bit here, Hendrik. One of the things that I've seen over the last 2 years is this interest for large investors in different countries to start spinning up marketplaces. It's apparent that marketplaces is a concept that seems to work in a lot of parts of the world. So as new organizations say, we need a marketplace in our country, we can go and copy what others are doing elsewhere, or we can leverage what they've done. How do you think about, number one, what it takes before your country is ready for its own online marketplace? And number two, if you were advising the investors of what it would take to build a successful marketplace, what are the first few things that you would suggest that they spend their money on?
That is a question that I deal with when I advise a variety of financial investors, hedge funds, EE, and the like. And I always am very hesitant when I hear the words, we want to spin up a marketplace in a foreign country. The very simple truth is that in most cases, you are going to be competing against local entrepreneurs who they've worked their entire life in that specific market, and they're going to be incredibly hard to compete with. For me, the best case example of that is what happened in the Middle East. Amazon came into the market late and realized that they were never ever going to beat Souk, and thus they opened the checkbook and they bought it.
Right.
So to answer your question, I think I always say, let's do diligence on your business. What are you thinking of? When you are thinking about a marketplace, let's first look at, are there emerging marketplace startups in this region that are in the moment looking for investment? In most cases, there are. And, would they be interested in speaking with an investor group that can provide them with capital? In most cases, entrepreneurs will always listen to investors that are able to provide them with capital. Secondly, when you go into a new market like Africa or Eastern Europe, Latin America, you have to understand that you are dealing with cities and political situation that can change literally by the day. So you have to understand that there's significant risk attached to it. But on the same hand, understand that the prize at the end of the day, if you execute this, it's pretty large.
Yes. Yeah.
I would also say that if I was to answer your question right at the moment in terms of that, I would be saying to investors, don't invest in marketplaces in new markets. It's not worth the pain at the moment, because in most cases you are competing against the really big and settled marketplaces like Alibaba, like Amazon, like Mercado Libre. There's a variety of these businesses. I would say that you should be investing into brands and businesses that help brands get into new markets. The biggest thing that people don't understand, and as somebody I spend about 80% of my time on marketplaces and researching this, is that these marketplaces are all essentially only looking after their best interests. There's no real afterthought for the brand or the business that they're partnering with. So I'm always keen in looking for startups that provide brands with control. What do we need to help local brands scale faster in the local region, i.e., in for example, we go back to example, in Canada or in Mexico, or so that there's that opportunity. Secondly, I think also one has to understand that at the current situation, what we find in ourselves, COVID-19 has essentially reset a variety of industries and markets. I always say that one of the things that people forget is that retail is essentially one of the largest employers in a market. If retail is closed, and it's happening all around the world, not just the US.
Yes.
I always ask investors to basically look at solutions where we can get local staff and give them employment. Because essentially you are wanting as an investor to also make a positive impact on the GDP growth of the market that you're in there. Yes, I understand that you're there to make a 10x return. But I think what I've learned over the years in markets such as Southeast Asia and in Japan and in China and in India and in the Middle East is that people and customers remember who the brands are that help them when the times are tough. And these brands essentially have a competitive moat that is almost impenetrable from any of these large businesses, because these consumers understand that this company, whatever the company's name is, provided me with employment, it provided me the opportunity to feed my family and the like. I know it's a very simplistic view of it, but I think in the moment, investors need to think really clearly about what they're getting into. Do they want to essentially get in a race to the bottom with an Amazon? Do they want to battle against companies that have, like Mercado Libre, like 15 years of experience in a market? Essentially, you're competing against the house, and the house is always going to win. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So I always tell investors, let's look at local startups but also look at the bigger picture. What can you do to empower a local region? Is that through investment in warehousing? Is that investing into solutions that can provide, for example, cross-border taxation services, which is still very much a huge pain? There's various parts of it. I just think that if you are going to go against a very large marketplace that's really well funded, and we are getting to a place where the 10x opportunities are very limited, and you have to be very clever as an investor to look for them. Excuse me.
Hendrik, let's come back to the question of brands choosing to distribute more globally. There are a number of pitfalls that these brands can run into, and I've got a handful of these issues to talk to you about. One of the big concerns that we hear a lot here in the United States is, why am I going to go into that country if I'm only going to create basically inventory that can be re-imported back into this country? We may have price differences across borders. I need to make my product affordable in those other countries, but that only created incentive for the product to show up back in my main market. How do you think about price discrepancies across borders and the incentives that creates for re-importing products back into higher price markets?
So, James, the sad reality is what you've just explained happens on a daily basis. And in some markets, you have, in China, it's called the Daigou ecosystem, where you have people that literally fly into South Korea or Australia. They go buy cheaper goods, then basically risk everything through border control, and then they sell it via, social platforms such as WeChat. So this is a reality. Let me just be clear. I think when you are thinking about cross-border and going international, I always say your first starting point is you need to trademark and patent what you have. Before a single item is found on a marketplace in a specific new market, you need to be able to tell me as a advisor, consultant, that you have patents and you have trademark protection. If you don't, I know it's costly, but if you don't, in most cases, you've already lost the war, and you are not going to be able to ever win a legal case, because somebody else has the legal right to sell your goods because you weren't thinking forward enough by patenting and trademarking your assets. So that's the first thing that you do.
But hang on a second. Yes. How does that practically work? I'm a new brand. I'm getting started in one country. My sales are starting to do well here in the U.S. Now I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm going to expand to some other countries. Yeah, it's entirely possible that somebody came and bought a suitcase of my product and took it home with them to whatever country they're in. But I can't be out there trademarking patents in 15. Like that's just a catastrophic impact on my bottom line. How do you think about this practically? Because quite frankly, I can't spend all of my new marketing dollars instead on legal fees to get all this stuff locked down. At what point does a company become big enough that it starts to make sense to be doing this?
So James, that's you've just explained why one of the questions or one of the solutions or one of the opportunities, but also the massive negativity around cross-border.
Yep.
And that's why I say that if you're a brand, you've got to go through the process strategically. If you are going into 15 markets at once, I can tell you from experience, 14 of them will fail and one of them will potentially be a winner. So we come back to the being strategic, being tactical. For me, I always say that you want to use platforms where you control what can be available in a market. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, and I use them as an example again because I know that because I've done some work with them. But Memento, when they deal with a local marketplace, they speak and ensure that that marketplace gives the product or the brand the best opportunity to be visually seen and found on the platform. That is something that you cannot buy. You cannot get that anywhere else. It's a low-risk solution to ensure that this marketplace is aware of your product, but also you have already then ensured that if something goes bad, you have a degree of buy-in from the platform to help you clean up. So that's the one thing. I think the reality is, as you always tell me, and I'm a firm believer in it, and is that brands have to understand that your product can be on any marketplace without your consent. It's about you ensuring that you control your distribution. It's about you controlling your wholesalers. It's about you controlling your sales channels. I know it sounds really contradictory, but if you control your sales channels and know who is selling what and where, the things that you've explained in terms of the diversion, the opportunities for counterfeits, it's less. Also, in most cases, these brands are significantly more profitable because they have set this all in motion. They've done the job. So this whole process, I want to be very clear to the audience as well. CrossBorder is capital intensive, it's resource intensive, but the outcome of this is huge. So you have to be strategic, i.e. have a growth plan of let's do one new market a year for 3 years, and at the end of year 3, we then sit down and we evaluate where we are with the 3. That is what I see with brands that are doing sales between $25 million up to $150 million.
Yep. Okay.
It's all about understanding what you can do, who you can do it with, and finding the most logical de-risking solution. The biggest thing that I shake my head at is that I see various brands opening up websites in new markets and going, like jumping up and down about themselves, about the fact that they now have a website in a new country. Yippee yay, that's great. The bigger question is, can a consumer find your product? In most cases, they won't, because they don't exist.
Yep.
Because they can't find you. Yep. And that is why I always say point number 1 is that you use the marketplace as a point of testing. It's a point of discovery, but the end goal is always to essentially learn and be able to, in a year or 18 months or 2 or 3 years time, to then do that market properly and then open a team on the ground and all of that stuff. That is the biggest mistake that I see. I understand that this is resource intensive, but if you are going to put in, anything between $1 million and $15 million into this, you have to be, I reiterate my words, tactical, strategic, but you also have to understand what you are going to get out. Your fundamentals need to be sound. You cannot have channel leakage. You cannot have counterfeits. So, for example, if you have your products made in China by a manufacturer, you must have it very clearly defined in the agreement that you have with that warehouse, that under no circumstances can they sell anything with a likeness of your product to anybody. They cannot do that. You can get that done by local legal teams in these markets, because in markets like China, the governments have stepped in and said, look, we need to better police this to ensure that we can attract brands from the entire world to sell to our people. So it's taking small steps. I always use the analogy. First we crawl, then we walk, then we run, and then we go to the Olympic Games. You've got to follow that methodology to get to the end point. This is not a silver bullet, James. That's the other thing I also need to tell management and listeners. This is not a solution to bad situations. This is not a solution to a business that it doesn't have sound fundamentals. I see that as well. Then I tell these businesses, you need to go figure out and solve your basics. Your advertising cost of sales, your all the fundamental stuff that we all take for granted, that needs to be singing like an orchestra. For example, playing at the Seattle football stadium. I know I've got the name wrong of it.
That's
the point
okay.
is that you want to have that solved before you go international. You've got to understand this is a strategic move that you do properly, and if you do it properly, there is a box of gold or a whatever potential, it's there.
Let me change gears a little bit here. You work with brands all day long. You work with companies that invest in brands all day long. Talk to me about a turning point for you professionally where you realized that working with brands, you were good at working with the brands and the investors of those brands. Was there a point where you said, yep, this makes sense for me to be doing this kind of work because I'm good at this kind of work?
So James, I think a friend of mine years ago, when I worked with him in a previous life, his words was, you developed an exit plan without telling the whole world that it was an exit plan. So audience, what needs to be said here is that I have been traveling to the US for years. It's one of the reasons why I know James. He was introduced to me by a mutual friend, and we got to speak with one another. The point is that when I was in America, like in the early middle 2000s, I worked in America, and I realized that this is a market where you need to understand what's going on because it's a look into the future. So I started going to the market, going to cities like New York, going to Seattle, Las Vegas. There's a variety of cities that I've traveled to. And the point is, I try and meet people on the ground because that's how you build a network. Another person who I met last year essentially told me that I built a social network without calling it Facebook. And that for me was like one of the moments of like, that's like the epiphany that you described. And that's when I realized that without thinking about it, I've essentially created something that I like doing. That's the one thing. I think the other point of validation for me was my newsletter, in the sense that my newsletter has consistently grown like gangbusters. And I'm talking, 100, 200, 300% growth month on month. I don't look on year on year because it's just ridiculous. The point is that there's almost no one looking at the space like I do. There's almost no one that's trying to follow the tea leaves or the cookies or whatever you want to call the breadcrumbs that all these marketplaces have. Because if you manage a brand, if you work for a marketplace, everybody wants to know what's going on. Everybody wants to know what the big platforms are doing. But everybody also wants to know who are the brands and the new platforms that are potentially there to disrupt them. So, the newsletter is a way in which I basically spend 25 hours a week basically curating news that I think is valuable, because I have an agreement with my audience, and that is that I respect their inbox once a week with a jam-packed edition. I know I've been told by various readers that it's a bit long, but the point is that you read it over multiple days with a cup of coffee or in some silence. The idea is to provide people with an asset that they can go back to, because I'm a firm believer in that we learn from the past to basically be successful in future. And a lot of the times people don't understand, James, is that a lot of the times these innovations that companies like write millions of lines of digital pixels worth of PR releases, somebody else has already done this.
Yes.
And these learnings that can be taken from it, these investors that make the same mistake every time. And the thing also is that I'm unbiased. I have no agreements with any marketplace. I've been threatened by the very large company in Seattle with the law, with legal terms because of what I've written. And my retort always is to this is, look, it's fact checked, and if you want me to change the numbers, then I want to see the numbers. Because essentially we're all trying to determine what is the truth. What is basically what is happening, what is the truth, and what is a bunch of hot air.
Hendrik, I want to thank you for joining us today. For those of you interested in learning more about Hendrik's blog, which I strongly urge all of our listeners to sign up for, please visit Heimrich.com. That's HAIMRICH.com. To finish today's podcast, I want to share some final thoughts. For brands to be successful on Amazon, a critical lever will be launching and managing Amazon advertising campaigns. We at BuyBox Experts are really big fans of the team at Kenshu. This sophisticated software helps brands to manage ad campaigns and gather further data intelligence across Amazon, Google, and Facebook platforms. To learn more, go to kenshu.com. And with that, I thank you all for joining and look forward to talking with you next time.
Thanks for listening to the BuyBox Experts podcast. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web, and we'll see you next time.